Hello, I'm Payal Raina, founder at the Fintech Marketing Community. Welcome to Learning with Market Leaders, a series or one-on-one conversation with leading industry minds that possess wealth of knowledge in financial and technology space. Today, I'm joined by Virginie O'Shea, founder of Firebrand Research and an advisory board member of Fintech B2B Marketing Community. Virginie, it's great to have you here today.
Great to be here.
Virginie, you are a research guru within the fintech capital market. So I'm sure our viewers today are really going to be looking forward to get some insights from you. So tell us more about your background. As I understand, you are the founder of Firebrand Research Company.
Yes, I picked an interesting year to set up a business, obviously being 2020 with all the things that are going on in the market. But certainly I've spent the last couple of decades writing, researching around capital markets fintech with a particular focus on post-trade. I've looked at lots of things related to collateral management, data management, all of those good things that people don't like to talk about, but are essential for the plumbing of the industry. And yes, I spent sort of the last 8 years before setting up the business as at another research firm, and I sort of led the practice in capital markets there when I left, and I set up this year at Firebrand, and the focus is sort of trying to be more digital in my approach to the market, so making sure that people don't have to wade through lots of PDFs, and research is more accessible, easier to understand, and that was my intent in setting up the business, and I set it up in around about March, I think it was. So yeah, been an interesting year.
Congratulations. I think that's phenomenal and perhaps quite inspiring for some of our listeners who are watching this interview, because of course being a role model in the industry from a research perspective and seeing that transition from a day-to-day job to actually starting your own company. So would love to kind of know about how does your day-to-day job now looks like, given you are an entrepreneur?
It's very similar to what I've been doing for years and years on the research front. Obviously, I spend a lot of time talking to people in roles where they're buying technology, where they're heads of operations, that kind of thing, trying to understand their priorities, obviously trying to make sure that my research is reflecting what's going on in the markets. But a lot of the other things I have to do now, and obviously we are all remote, so we're not in person, so I'm having to do a lot of, social outreach and these kinds of things on things like LinkedIn, obviously networks, attending virtual events, speaking at virtual events. I also am a judge for a couple of the bankers awards, so that was another way of sort of reaching out to the market and getting involved in that. And I've done all kinds of different weird and wonderful things in terms of using all the different tools to do sort of Zoom calls 1 minute, WebEx the next. But it's my day-to-day is pretty busy, I'd say.
Gosh, I don't know how do you manage that. Your hands seems pretty quite full at the moment. So no,
yep.
But yeah, no, that's great. Virginie, kind of looking at from capital markets and some of the macro trends, would be good to get your thoughts on how has capital market industry adapted to the unique circumstances of 2020. As you rightly mentioned, this year has been a strange year for everyone, and digital being the core focus.
Yeah, I think it showed up a lot of the gaps in digital transformation. Obviously, the interesting ones are, not a lot of people were using things like Teams or remote access communication tools. So I think that was one area where I've seen a lot of adoption in a very rapid pace. I'd say there's been challenges, obviously, firms that have got, very old legacy tech has been challenging for them to build front ends where it's accessible in a remote access environment, and trying to build front ends there has been challenging. And I'd say mental health wise, I think a lot of people have struggled, because a lot of these guys have never ever worked from home. Thankfully I have, and I'm used to it. But a lot of the people I talk to on a day-to-day basis, they're used to having their routine of going into work, and it very much frames the day, them commuting in and then doing their work and then coming back. But where you're moving from one room to another in your house is quite weird, and it's really hard to switch off. And a lot of people have been telling me they've been very stressed on that front, because they feel like they're always at work now because they're working from home. So I understand that's a really, really tough transition for a lot of people, and it seems like we're not going to be an end to it this year. So it is tough to deal with that on an ongoing basis, I think.
Yeah, you're right. It has been a quite surreal world, and given you and I are talking here on Zoom at this point, in a normal environment, we probably would have been having this conversation in an office rather than face to face. So yeah, no, totally. See your perspective there. So where do you think, Virginie, in terms of we are now almost close to end of the quarter in 2020, where do you see are the big top topics for fintech this year?
Well, I think cloud has probably been the stellar topic of the year. There's been a lot of strategic announcements with cloud partnerships this year. I mean, we've been very slow as an industry to move towards a cloud environment, I think, overall. Maybe a lot of the mid-tier firms have moved, and some of the small firms, but a lot of the large ones still have a long way to go to move things to the cloud. And I think that that's been shown up. There's been a lot of discussion about it this year, as has there been a lot of discussion about data and data integrity and things like that. And most recently, we saw one of the largest fines I've ever seen for data governance failures. I think it was this week. I won't mention who it was, but it was fairly significant, and the regulator went into detail on what they were failing on. So certainly, data is top of mind for a lot of firms, and there's been a lot of talk about data services. If I look at sort of support for clients, ESG and sustainability have been big topics, and a lot of the data and technology to support that investment trend is a big focus for the sell side in particular this year as well. Obviously, the buy side has been investing for a while in that space. It's particularly around data. But I'd say those are the big topics. I mean, there's always chatter about AI and machine learning, and there are certainly interesting applications for it, but that's slightly less developed, I think, overall.
So looking ahead then, where do you see what opportunities and challenges lies ahead of us in 2021 and beyond?
If I think about the challenges, a lot of firms this year have had to put their innovation and transformation projects on hold, largely because business as usual has been quite tough to deal with. We've had a lot of volatility in the market, and some of the strategic projects just slowed down because IT resources were a sort of a minimum at certain points. So I think picking that back up and making sure that the large projects around legacy infrastructure replacement continue on, despite the uncertainty in the market, is one thing. I think next year will show whether we're able to do that. And there's still a lot of questions. I mean, I think understanding when we're going to be able to have people back in the office properly, without sort of having this back and forth going on. I think that's going to be a key question to understand.
So as part of a fintech marketing community, one of the mission of fintech marketing community is to simplify the complexities of fintech. As you pointed out, some of the core topics like cloud, data, sustainability, AI. So from your perspective, how have marketers changed their approach? And the key question is, what do you think industry has learned? Because so what can we learn? And of course, how does it impact marketers?
Yeah, I think it's been really weird for a lot of people in marketing. I mean, obviously, those networking events that we're so used to having have all been cancelled or they've gone virtual, and it's a very different environment to try and do something virtually. Certainly, trying to navigate around a conference hall is impossible if it's virtual. I think there's going to be a lot of developments around that. People have been talking to me about possibly having virtual reality headsets in future for events, just to take into account this stuff. And I mean, that is a weird concept, but it might work. We don't know. I mean, this could be the future of conferences, because thinking about the lessons we've learned this year, and thinking about sustainability, aren't we going to see a big transformation for people not actually traveling as much, probably? People are reviewing their office footprint as well, and how to sort of bring that down a bit. So I think marketing side, people have learned a lot more about how to deal with this sort of remote environment where you're having to generate leads, you're having to engage with your clients in a completely remote circumstance, which is not easy if you're not used to it. Obviously that's you're having to use lots of different channels that you maybe didn't have to use before, such as Twitter, such as LinkedIn, all of the different social platforms, also trialing lots of different webinar platforms, engagement platforms, seeing if there's other interesting things that others aren't doing. So I think there's been a lot of exploration, and I imagine there's going to be a lot more interesting things being developed in future as well.
Sure. And I think you mentioned a good point there that given everything is virtual from events perspective and other marketing activities, another challenge I probably see is that since 95% of the decisions are still driven by emotions as per the Harvard research, so marketers need to find out a way to how to earn that trust, especially if they're trying to get those new clients on board and if they haven't actually met them face to face. That kind of that issue of trust is going to be quite key to jump through that, especially in this environment. So of course the virtual AI goggles are not going to
Well, still a lot of work and on the sales front and the marketing front is done sort of in person, people chatting to each other and things like that. And it is very different on Zoom and those kinds of, it's not quite the same. It's slightly more stilted and people are still adapting to it. So I think it's going to take time. I don't know if with VR is actually going to work, but it's an interesting concept. I don't know how you do VR pub chats, for example, but yeah, an interesting one for the future.
Yeah, no, indeed. Look, thank you so much, Virginie, for your time. As we're coming close to the end of our discussion here, one of the questions we ask all our guests is about their key top tips or advice or takeaways for marketers they can actually take back home and actually start implementing it in their organization in the day-to-day life. So what are your pearls of wisdom going to be here for us?
I mean, I think certainly, as I mentioned, the social channel aspect and making sure you've got a holistic approach to marketing, thinking across the different channels that you have to hand is very important. Think about your messaging, thinking about, making sure that you are engaging with as wide a community as possible is probably the number one. And related to that is obviously keeping your message succinct and using industry statistics and things like that. I mean, obviously I help marketing people on that front with doing research, but certainly that you want to think about the messages and the interesting angles that your clients are interested in, keeping the message relevant to them, keeping it on around the message that your company wants to bring out there, but also what is of interest to your clients in this current environment as well. And lastly, I guess in terms of looking forward, I guess thinking about trialing different technologies as well, and trying a more holistic approach there, maybe thinking about slightly outside of the box in terms of the marketing front and what you may have been used to in the past. Obviously, we're going to have to change long term. I think the industry is going to change. And unfortunately, what the pandemic has brought to us is a different frame of mind, a different perspective on life. So certainly that's one other thing to bear in mind going forward.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Virginie. Again, thanks for your time. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Great. So for our listeners and viewers, thank you so much for your time today, and to keep yourself up to date on latest market insights happening within the fintech marketing. Until then, we meet with another exciting guest. Thank you.